Okay, in today's video, we're going to be doing a full edit. We're going to look to pull together raw files. We're going to look to stitch them, blend them, edit them, and then finally stylization as well. The complete run through of an edit. And we're going to dive straight on in to the program. This is a synagogue that I actually photographed in Târgu Mureș in Romania. And you can see here, it's got this amazing ceiling. I've got a range of lighting. And there's this harsh kind of light coming in from left and right from these top windows. So there's going to lead to quite a lot of challenges actually, and this is a regular thing that happens for me in interior works. So actually, these are the images we're going to work on. What we've got here is we've actually got 5 in the center, 5 top brackets, and of course 5 at the bottom here too. So I'm going to look to try and pull these things together. Now, usually what I look to do is look at the kind of range of lighting. I can see already here that actually we've got pretty nasty light on the brightest exposure. I don't think we're going to need this because this one maintains everything that we want. So it's got, you know, it's got details in the shadow areas and more. So that means all 3 of my brightest exposures can kind of disappear. But before I do that, I just want to check the top one, make sure that's exactly true, that statement, and it is. And then of course the bottom one too. And to be honest with you, yeah, same thing, really, really bright, harsh. So I'm going to get rid of all those 3, just select them, remove. Next up, I'm going to blend these three. Next up, I'm just going to blend this together. I'm actually going to do HDRs on each of those 3, and I want to see what it's going to look like. Is it going to look decent? That's the kind of thing here. Is it actually going to look like worth doing with this harsh lighting in Photoshop or Lightroom? And you can see this kind of looks a little bit strange. If I take auto settings off, is it working? It is kind of harsh, to be honest. I've chosen a difficult file on purpose. I'm actually going to leave the settings, auto settings off. I'm not sure about it, you know. I'm not actually sure if that's actually going to look decent. The next thing I want to check is I'm actually going to open Luminar Neo. Okay, so what I've done is I've opened up Luminar Neo. I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I just want to know, does this file, these 4 here, does it blend nicely? Or am I going to need to do a more complicated mask in Photoshop? So this is what I'm just testing. 4 images, put them in that merge, and I just want to look at the final results. I want to compare Lightroom to Neo and just see if there's a difference. Oh, we have this blended file. Now let's have a look at it. It's fairly similar-ish. It's kind of got still these blown out highlights. It does look a little less fake though, to be honest. It looks quite solid. Neo is really nice at pulling together these files now. If that's the case, I'm actually going to look to kind of then do exactly the same thing with the other files, the top and the bottom. So in the top, of course, same thing as before. We've got these 4 here. We're going to pull them into merge. I'm going to do the bottom ones, those 4 there, pull them into merge. There they are. That's the top and the bottom. Continue. And that's going to do that. Okay, so it's done the top and the bottom. Now I can go one stage further than that because I can now pano stitch this. And we haven't done this before. So I'm actually going to grab these, now they're done, and put them into pano stitch. Press start, and it's going to stitch those together for me too, and I'm going to be able to look at the full final result. To be honest with you, the process that I'm showing you here is exactly the thought process that I have every time. Is there a software program that works? Blend these images together a quicker way than manually stitching in Photoshop. If the lighting's too harsh or the image isn't going to suit it, then unfortunately I have to go down the Photoshop route, which is okay, we can do that. But if I can speed up my process, I look to try to do so. That's what I'm doing here. Continue. This is going to show you a quick crop tool here. And to be honest with you, that's fine because it's just it's cropping any edges. I'm just going to create a stitched pano just here, and we're going to look at it, and it's going to show you this result. To be honest with you, I quite like what it's done. It's done some base adjustments, and it looks quite good. I'm going to roll with the Neo one. I'm going to export it and save it, which is just up here. Export folder, select the folder that I've already got the images in. So if I do this, I bring it up here, Romania. I'm going to change the name of it and actually put Luminar Edit, and I'm going to save it like so, export. Okay, what I've done then is I've used that Neo blend, and I'm actually here again back in Lightroom with it, Luminar version, you can see that there. Right, let's have a little look at this. Let's get into it. So first of all, we want to kind of try and align things up nicely. So the auto tool, you can see there, is doing just a slight adjustment, and it's giving a sliver of light at the top. Is it big enough to worry about? Probably yes, because the pews in the bottom, if you see there, the pews are what we want nice and straight. We're going to do this. We're going to reduce the highlights just slightly, bring up those shadows a little bit more, add a little bit of contrast, and just boost the exposure a tiny fraction. I'm also going to just add a little bit of warmth back into this file to kind of make it look like, well, kind of what it did look like, to be honest. So these are the things. Dehaze is going to be quite important here. It's going to cut through some of this window glare. You can see that here. Look, if I go left, it's pulling the haze kind of more harshly. Now that can be quite a good effect, but I'm actually going to do that and do it the negative way. I want to see this in nice clarity, so let's cut through that. I'm going to boost the vibrance ever so slightly, a little bit of texture, send the blacks backwards and pull up the whites, but not too much. I just don't care about outside the window that much, but I don't want this harsh lighting as much as this. So I've got to be careful with it, so be careful what you're doing. Okay, so one of the problems we've got with blending in this way is sometimes it creates this kind of difference in light between highlight areas and shadow areas, and that's kind of what it's done here. If you zoom on into the image, you can kind of clearly see around the window there's a slight purple kind of edge to it. Okay, so you can see here by just ticking this box, chromatic aberration, it can remove some of that a little bit, and you can see it's doing that. You can kind of just undo it, it's very purple, tick it, it reduces the purple down, but not exactly where I want it. We can go into the manual part, and we can actually then just use the dropper tool, and we can just come into here, select the purple, and it will move it a little bit more. I can even come into that piece if I wish, and it's going to just keep, you can take samples from lots of it and just reduce that down, and that's exactly what I've just done. Reduce it down to a point where you're kind of happy. You're never going to get 100% satisfied, and we can fine-tune this a little bit later, but for now I just want to make sure it's a bit better, and that's what's done. Look at that, it's a lot better. It's more of a kind of grey colour, and it's got rid of all that purple around the edge. Pretty important, we've done that. Zoom back out, and you can't really notice it. Now, to be honest with you, I'm kind of happy where we're at here. But one thing I do want to do before I go any further is make sure that this is the kind of crop that I want, make sure it's aligned a little bit like I want. And I just sometimes do a little bit of base adjustments here. I'm going to just rotate the image ever so slightly. I'm going to constrain the crop so it's exactly where I want it. And then I'm going to look at my crop overlays. We talked about that in the first episode. I'm going to bring this in, and I'm looking at this line here to line this up with this here. And then what we can do is we can just lift the crop, looking at our edges. I want this edge, I want it to be on that line at the back of the room, and I want this window and this window on the left to kind of line up exactly. So that's exactly what I'm doing. And we can just tuck it in a tiny bit more, and you can see we're now hitting the edge of that window, the edge of that window, and we're hitting the pews exactly correctly. Now, this isn't my final crop. This is basically just my editing crop, what we're going to work with. Nice and easy. We've kind of controlled the lighting. We've done some gentle adjustments. Now we're going to move on into Photoshop. So let's do that. Okay, so we've got the image open in Photoshop. You can see it's quite clear, quite nice, looking good. But ultimately, it's got this soft glow to it. Our eye's not drawn to a particular place. It's just drawn to the light. And I want to shape that light. I want to start to kind of make you feel like you're looking at the image and it's popping and you're showcasing that beautiful ceiling above. Is if we click the view button, so that's the top here, when we look at the view button, we've got this rulers. I always make sure that rulers is on. So that gives you these rulers here on the inside of the image, and that's something that I'm always looking to have on because I can use lines then. I can basically draw lines out from it by clicking and holding and pulling in, and we can put the central line in the middle of the image. And you can see there, if I do that, the image is then nearly in the center. The top is, but the bottom is not so much. So that's the first thing, is I want to just fine tune that. And we're going to do that by just doing what we did last week. We're going to basically press new layer, Control T, brings that up. And we're basically just going to tweak this out. And that's easy. We're just going to pull this out like so. I'm just using, see the triangle, top left, top right, that's looking good. I can then just pull this down because actually same thing as before, it's not exactly where I want it. And again, same thing with the floor here, we can just pull it out. And here we're just basically tweaking the image to get it kind of more centralized a little bit wider as well, because the thing is, this is a 17mm tilt shift. So the thing about this file is, it does make things look a little bit squashed. And I think already that's looking a bit better. If I press go, it's a little bit straighter down the middle. The next thing I'm going to look to do is just come up to filter. Again, I'm going to go to lens correction. And what I could look to do is, when I'm in lens correction, to finalize this sort of like angle and make sure things are correct, I'm just going to look at this perspective, because I have a feeling that my tripod position might have been ever so slightly out on the main job. Let's have a little look at this. -1. These are the things that make the difference. You know, we're basically looking now at our image, pulling it up a tiny bit. Same thing as before, pull that down. I'm kind of happy where we're at, because I've got nearly enough window on both sides. We've got the flooring exactly, that's as straight as we're going to get it. We're kind of there. Okay, next stage. We're going to look to do some base edits on this. Now, sometimes I just pull images into the camera raw filter if I want to tweak them. I do that quite a bit. And what I can do here is I can go into filters. I'm going to look to use a radial filter. And the first thing I'm going to look to do is draw in a radial filter right here in the center of the image. Nice shape to it. I'm going to bring it a little bit smaller than that. I'm going to keep the focus kind of where I want it. And the next thing I'm going to look to do is invert that mask. That's going to show then the outside of this image. And the final thing I'm going to look to do is pull down my exposure on the outside. Not loads, but just enough. I'm going to increase the contrast, pull down the shadows and the highlights on that outside edge. I can reposition this and it's looking like so. And then what I'm going to do is add one more, create one more new mask. Again, another radial filter. And this time we're going to look to do exactly the same thing, but we're going to keep it in the inside. And we're going to boost the inside just ever so slightly. We're going to put the contrast up. We're going to pull down the highlights just a very tiny bit, but we're going to pull up the shadows. Now we can then tweak this, keep the focus where we want it, like so. And we're going to pull the shadows up just ever so slightly, tweak the temperature. These are all subtle adjustments. And when I press OK, this is going to be our change. Instant improvement. What we're now doing is drawing our eye into the image. Okay, we're ready to jump into Luminar Neo. So let's press Filter, Skylum Software. We're using the plugin version here. It's going to open up Luminar Neo. Opens up Luminar Neo, and when it opens it up in our kind of presets area of Luminar Neo, which is fine. That's not a problem. Now, these are all kind of like presets that come with a package. I'm not going to use any of these. They're not my style. They're not what I want to work with. You can do if you want, but to be honest with you, fine art editing is kind of your style, and to be honest with you, it's important to have your own. So to me, I'm going to go into edit and look to stylize this myself. When we open up edit, we've got this kind of version here. Now, there's a process to this. We want to kind of do base essentials first, then we're going to look to do lighting and creative effects, and then finally we'll look to do any kind of overall enhancements, sharpening of course, and noise reduction if we need to at the end. So let's have a look at develop. In here we've got similar tools to Lightroom, but what we're going to look to do is we're going to basically look at masking, we're going to look at adjustments. So let's click luminosity and let's check our highlights first of all, and it's going to showcase this area of the image. I'm going to draw this out. We can select here anything, darks to highlights, but I'm going to go to highlights. This is showing our brightest parts of the image. I'm going to grab this triangle and I'm going to pull it out to just soften that a little bit. Adjustments, we're going to pull this down or up. What do we want to do? So it's really up to you at this point. I actually think we could bring this up a tiny fraction because it's going to emphasize that the light's popping at the back of the room. Next up, I'm going to reduce the shadows a little bit, and we're going to maybe just look at what the highlights are doing, and we could bring them up a little bit too. And then we've now got this nice light kind of created at the back of the room. Let's go back to masking. Same thing as before. Now, when we do an edit, go to edits and it shows you what you've done here on the edits panel. This is now saved. We go back to tools and anything extra we do is going to add on top of this. So it's a little bit different to Lightroom. So same thing as before, masking. Let's look at luminosity mask once again. This time I want to select my shadows. So let's pull this down. This is our darks area, and let's just smooth that out a little bit. Let's just transition this like we did on the highlights. Same as before, we're now going to look to increase these shadow areas, boost our contrast because those areas would be more contrasty. I'm going to reduce the highlights down and finally introduce my own shadows. So I've introduced exposure and then I've reduced the shadows down. So basically I've brought up the highlights essentially is what I've done there. Now you can do this as much or as little as you want, and you could use curves to actually fine tune some of this and actually introduce kind of parts of the image where you want it. Already our images are starting to come alive. Things are looking quite good. Go back to edits and we've got those two versions. We could tweak them at any time. We can look here what they're doing. Let's go back to tools. What are we going to do next? Let's look at details. Now, same thing as before applies here. Now, when it comes to sharp edges and getting details right for me, this isn't sharpening, but this is kind of like details with the image, bringing details out of the image. And we've got small details in here, and we've got medium details within this room. And you can see that quite clearly. We can do that with masking, or we can do it as global adjustments. I never really recommend doing any global adjustments. Same thing as before. I'm going to go to masking. So let's look at luminosity once more. Same as before, we want to get those bright areas where there's basically light falling and kind of get the details popping. So let's look at this brighter area. Let's pull this out just as before. Go to adjustments, small details, medium details, and large. Let's go into our mood. Now mood is basically where we're stylizing the image ourselves. We're adding kind of like LUTs to the image creatively. And I've got some of my own custom LUTs and you can see those here and what they do to kind of images. These are just presets that I've basically saved in the mood section of this. If you look at golden boost and we look at green and gold boost, we can kind of see quite clearly that they're doing quite a nice effect. I quite like the gold boost, and we can basically then add that in and we can basically adjust this to suit. So I could basically adjust the amount, the saturation, and of course we've got the contrast here too. Now, I don't want too much of this. I just want a little boost of the golds and the overall look. Add my LUT to this to kind of finish it. But if we weren't going to do that, we could use any of the ones that are already in Luminar Neo, which are the ones here: cinematic toning, creative, cross-processing, and of course for portraits, portrait toning. Finally, I'm going to come back up, and I'm not quite happy where the shadows are at in the very bottom of this image, so I might just bring them up a little bit with a linear gradient. And bearing in mind there would be windows behind this camera's position, so it wouldn't be as dark as this down below. Let's pull it up just a fraction. I think around there is pretty good. Okay, we're looking a lot better. Okay, I'm just going to send that back to Photoshop for me. When it's done, we'll have a look. I'm going to zoom right on into those purple spots first of all. Now, one new tool that's been added fairly recently is just the remove tool. And I find that pretty good for stuff like this because you've got these spots here, and what it's basically doing is it's using parts of the image to kind of cover it up. So these ones here are going to be really easy. We could just draw on them and it's going to remove those purple fringes. Easy, easy, easy. That's really fast. You just do it gradually, be patient, softly do it, and you can see it's just fixing that marble effect at the back of the room. If I ever want to print an image out or make it look the best it can, large format, then we need to get rid of spots like this. And that's basically what I've just done. I've got one more thing to do with the windows. Control J, duplicate the layer once more, zoom back into this area here. Now, this is another common problem that we face with interior photography, especially when we've done editing in this way, this faster way of blending images together. In Luminosity Mask, less so. Look at this blown out window. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is look to use the pen tool to fix this. Now, this is going to take a bit of time, but basically I need to draw around here. Now, I'm not going to show you how to use the pen tool. It's too difficult to explain and make this video too long. There's processes you can do online where you can practice this. Draw around all of this and show you what I've done. Once you've done it and you've met the point you started, you can make selection. I'm basically going to just pixel that, 1 pixel, and it's going to draw it like that. Now, what is that doing? That is stopping me overspilling those areas. So what I can then do is I can basically use a clone stamp tool. So here, this one, clone stamp, and I can basically now make a softer, smaller brush, size much smaller. There's your opacity, and here's the brush. Opacity 100%, I can basically zoom on in here and I can correct some of these errors. I'm going to start with these ones. Sometimes it's good to kind of reduce this down, right down, and do it, less is more, but I'm going to start at the bottom with 100% to fix this. Now, you don't want it to be repetitive. So the easiest way to do this is just to keep drawing sections of the image from here and here to kind of fill this in. Now, it's going to take a bit of patience, but I'm going to get this looking a little bit better. Let's have a look. So once I've done this, I'll show you after. Okay, kind of get in there. You might say this is overkill, James. You don't need to do this much stuff. But to me, I always like this kind of fine detail in the image. You can do this with kind of lots of parts of this. Fix this part and this part. And you can actually get rid of a lot of that last glows of light and make this as good as you want. The more time you take, the better the end result, of course. We can again go to our camera raw filter. What we can actually now do is higher contrast, bring down our exposure, press OK, add a layer mask. So at the moment it's on the image, the whole image is adjusted, as you can see. Then we can add a layer mask. Do you remember when we add a layer mask, what we've got? White reveals, black conceals, Control I, go to a white mask, get our brush, same as before, like so. We don't need this big. I actually press the remove tool. So just go down to a smaller brush like this, and we can actually essentially just check the opacity, bring down those areas that are too bright, and get that changed. And you could even be more aggressive as well, to be fair, with your edit. Now this is a kind of dodging and burning. Essentially you're darkening some areas, you're lightening other areas, and that's good. That basically helps to keep that focus where you want it, the eye drawn in where you want it. And this has taken a bit of time, and that's essentially always the thing. We're always looking to take a bit of time when we do this. Zoom on out, already that is a lot better on that window. So we've got spot here and brush remove tool. These three yellow things down here, they are place cards about the interior from some dude. I don't know why he was leaving them around. There's a remove tool to get rid of them. There's a couple more over here. I don't think we need them. Let's get rid of them. And let's zoom on in. I think there's a couple more. So we're going to remove all of them. They're just place cards telling people information. This synagogue isn't used, but people do walk around it sometimes to have like tours, guided tours. Why am I doing this? Again, it's a little bit distracting having all of those place cards all over the pews and the seating. I'm just going to remove them all. I don't like them. They're not adding anything to the image, so let's take them away. This tool, by the way, has improved dramatically in recent years, so it's now a lot easier to kind of do this. I'm going to get rid of that one too. We don't need it. There we go. Now, you see here, I've not taken away from the architecture. I've taken away distracting elements. We're kind of happy, right? I don't like this chair at the edge of the frame here, so I'm probably going to remove that too. We could do whatever. Your image, whatever your image has, is kind of like up to you to kind of choose where to draw the line at this point. But for me, I just take distracting elements away. So again, I'm going to get rid of this chair when it finally wants to work. Hopefully it removes some of that, and it does. Eye is drawn to the center of the image, and we're quite happy. I actually can press now, File, Save. It will send it back to Lightroom, and once it's sent it back to Lightroom, we can then look to do our final cropping and exporting right there. I prefer the exporting element of Lightroom than I do here in Photoshop. It maintains the colors nicer, especially for the web and so on, so we're going to do that. Okay, now we're back in Lightroom. I'm going to make that one green. I'm going to make this one yellow because it was our work in progress. That is where we've now edited, and that was where we were at. Look at the difference here. Now, you might say this is looking a little bit harsh here, James, in which case I always do my final adjustments here in Lightroom. So we can basically just pull this down, make this not quite so aggressive in the center, and we could basically pull up our shadows as well if you want to blend that out a little bit more. We can also here use our color mixer. We can use our color grading to do stuff as well. The color mixer is quite a good one because what we can do is we can select a color, this orange for example, and we can actually boost some of those individual colors out. And this is what I normally look to do towards the tail end of an edit if I think I want to emphasize some of those colors. Darkening them off, lightening them, in this case lightening them, in this case probably again lightening them, it's to where the light is. Areas here like this orange, we could look to kind of reduce down the saturation and maybe darken those off too, and that's going to help draw your eye correctly but not be blown out. One more thing, down here, purple in those seats, those blues. Look at this. There's lots of purple down there. We can actually just tweak that where we want it. Back up to basics, do some global adjustments, add a little bit more of our temperature, a little bit of vibrance, and look at I'm just fine tuning all the time. Now I'm going to look to do my aspect crop. I'm going to do a 5:4. I'm going to pull the image where I want it, which is going to be kind of like here. I'm probably going to go halfway through that pew. I might go a little bit into this top section, just trim it at the very, very top. I've gone with the ceiling as being nice and straight, edges are straight, and that is our final result. Okay, we're going to conclude there. I think we're done for this series. We've edited together. I hope you've taken something away from it. It's a pleasure to kind of go through all of this, and I know that people aren't always interested in the editing side. They've got their own ways of doing it, and that is the point really. These days there's so many software programs. I've just given you what I'm currently using. Now in the past I've done other stuff and used to use Nick's software a little bit as well, but these days primarily I've been using Luminar Neo, Photoshop and Lightroom. But actually, to be honest with you, there's so many cool tools out there to be able to edit interiors these days, and I said that on episode 1. Okay, so what's coming up next on the channel? Well, it's actually going to be a 2-part series from here in Istanbul. I've actually been photographing and filming in the mega city, showcasing cityscapes, urban environment and some hidden interior photography too. And I filmed it in a 2-part series, and we're going back to our regular schedule, uploading first on Tuesday. We're going to follow that up literally next weekend. I'm off to Sicily for 2 weeks, and we're going to be following that series up with content from Italy too. So it's been a pleasure to show you my edits. I hope you've enjoyed it. Until next time, see you all very, very soon. Bye for now.